Here we go. Welcome to the 19th episode of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been following this series, you understand what we are doing. We are shining a light on incredibly smart, accomplished people and helping them share stories from their careers and lives, as well as anecdotes about their past, present, and future. Today, I am so pleased to welcome two such rock stars of the music business, Mark Cates and Jim Griffin. Before we get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please take advantage of the chat room and introduce yourself to the other attendees. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people like Jim and Mark and the amazing work that they do day to day in the industry. But the second reason is a little bit more nuanced. Some of you may know that I make my living as a music industry headhunter. By definition and function, I help people connect with companies. So in this series, my goal is to help you make such connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat. Please introduce yourselves, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview itself. Secondly, I want to thank our sponsors. Without their support, we couldn't do what we do. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. So let's get down to business. Today's interviewer is my close friend and the person who's helped me with the Who Knew series from the start, Mr. Jim Griffin. Jim is always one of the smartest people in the room, if not the smartest person in any room he enters. He is a digital music expert and frequently asked to testify before congressional panels on copyright and related digital proceedings. He was Geffen Records' very first CTO, and in that capacity, he oversaw the very first digital download of a song. So you may consider him the OG of the digital era of music. Jim is the co-founder and curator of the music industry's most interesting digital gathering, the Fa List, which if you are not hip to already, please hit me up and I can get you added. In doing so, your knowledge and contacts across this industry will expand exponentially. Joining Jim as our featured guest today is Mr. Mark Cates. Mark and Jim's paths first crossed in the music business back in the 90s when they both worked for legendary company Geffen Records. Mark has been a central figure in the genre of alternative music since before it even had a name. His work has included A&R, promotion, marketing, label head and owner, and is now primarily an artist manager. Mark grew up in the Boston area, where Mission of Burma's music inspired him to work for their label Ace of Hearts. From there, he moved to Big Time Records in LA and artists like Love and Rockets, Alex Chilton, and the Hoodoo Gurus. His work there led to Geffen and DGC Records, where he spent 10 plus years and created the alternative promotion department, eventually segueing to A&R and playing a significant role in the development of the alternative radio format. He signed Beck, Jawbreaker, Elastica, Alabama 3, and many others. He brought Sonic Youth to Geffen and A&R'd albums for them, as well as Nirvana, Hole, Teenage Fan Club, Sushi and the Banshees, White Zombie, and many others, as well as co-executive producing the soundtracks for Beavis and Butthead Do America and Suburbia. Cates left Geffen in 1998 to run Grand Royal Records for the Beastie Boys and work with them and their roster, including Sean Lennon and Luscious Jackson. In 2001, he returned to Boston and established Fenway Recordings, a music management and record company. Coincidentally, Mission of Burma decided to reunite that year, and he again worked with them as well as MGMT, The Cribs, Doves, and Swim Mountain as a manager. As DJ Carbo, he was resident at Los Angeles Electronica Club Atmosphere at the Viper Room for 2 years, as well as on the legendary pirate station KBLT, and since 2003 has hosted the Fenway Recording Sessions in Boston. As a DJ, he's appeared alongside Paul Oakenfold, David Bowie, Tricky, Richie Houghton, DJ Rap, Groove Rider, the Jungle Brothers, and many others. The Fenway sessions have brought nearly 450 shows to Boston, including Echo and the Bunnymen, Fun, Diplo, Two Door Cinema Club, Alt J, Built to Spill, and hundreds more. Mark is the founder of the Shout Syndicate Fund, created at the request of Boston Mayor Marty Walsh for the nonprofit arts community to address a funding gap for after-school arts programs. He's also served on the Leadership Council of Boston Creates, the mayor's comprehensive arts plan. Please welcome Mark and Jim to the smartest people in the room. Take it away, boys.
Well, I want to start out by saying I've never done this outdoors before, and I don't have a keyboard, so I can't participate in the chat. And yet all these names come up in front of me, and people like Aaron Hartley, for whom I have the most respect, or Ann Chadovitz. Now, let me tell you something about Ann. If you get royalties from Sound Exchange, they're not subject to recoup because Ann fought at the union that they would not be subject to recoup. So really, I got to say, and I would type it out if I could into the chat room, but wow, that's where the action is today, and Mark and I are going to try to distract you somewhat. Karen Allen, there you go. These little boxes pop up like a toaster on my handheld, but I'm in a public park in this little town of 300 people in the Plains, Virginia, where I live. And before I really get into it, I want to mention that Jackson Turner died on the 20th of July. Oh God, there's Christina Callio, Mark. Could you believe it? Jackson Turner was a hip hop guy from Brooklyn who went to Buffalo, learned Chinese, and then went to Beijing and rapped in Chinese. I mean, talk about an amazing spirit. Died July 20th. I learned this just yesterday. So I want to pass it along to people because he didn't get the recognition he deserved, and he was an amazing guy. So just going to throw that out there before we tear into DJ Carbo and have fun learning about what he's done. Although, Tom, that list you read, what else is there to say? I mean, you just put that down as a list on Discogs, and you've got somebody who's extraordinarily fascinating, and Mark Kate certainly is. So, hey, Cato, welcome.
Jim, thank you, and thanks, Ann.
It's great to have you. You know, you're really one of my favorite people. There's a lot of reasons, but I mean, for God's sakes, you're the only person who ever gave me a gold record. That was
Wow.
That was fun.
I didn't even know that.
No, I mean, you know, people used to pass them around like candy, but who thought of the tech guys?
I think Aerosmith should have given you one.
You know, they certainly should have, but they weren't the kind of people to take those things into account, you know, to be passing around credit for things. It's funny. Although I did read something the other day that I want to commend to everybody. Rolling Stone had a piece about Rick Rubin's favorite 21 tracks that he'd ever produced. And he mentioned how much the people he worked with hated Aerosmith until they actually did a track with them. I think it was Walk This Way, right? Anyway, Cato. Let's tear into it. You know, I hate to do this and to go backwards because I think it's a terrible way to start a Zoom, and it sends a direction that we're not going to be talking about the future, but we are. We are going to be talking about the future. You are a man who thinks about the future and what's coming. You've always been able to tell me what I was going to be listening to, even when I didn't know it. So we're going to get there, but first we have to lay the groundwork. And you and I had a nice little argument the other day about whether you started DGC, and of course you didn't. It started before you came to Griffin. We know this.
That's not true.
Wow. Pardon me?
It didn't start before I came to Griffin, but I didn't start.
But you said that in refutation of the possibility.
Anyway.
Now look, it
wasn't my decision to start it.
Okay, good. You were alt Griffin. You'll agree to that.
I will.
And that there wasn't people thinking about alternative until you arrived. In fact, that was why people wanted you.
Right. Well. First of all, I do like that line in my bio because the word wasn't in use at that time. I started in 1987, and the A&R people were signing artists, and they weren't convinced that the company would know how to market them. So that was my opportunity. It started with Teresa Enzenat, an A&R person and kind of a secret weapon in that company.
Worked with Tom Zutaut.
Correct. And that's how I got to meet Tom, but also Gary Gerst, Danny Heaps. That's probably most of it in terms of the people that wanted me there. Hopefully I'm not forgetting anybody. but yeah, we didn't, and they couldn't decide where to put me. They didn't really want me to be in the promotion department. And A&R and promotion is I don't know how much of a conflict it is these days, but and at Geffen, it was sort of a constant battle. And it was the kind of battle that people that run companies like to have, the people under them waging, because it means everyone's working hard and being competitive. And generally there wasn't a lot of bloodshed. And then we had two labels competing with each other. And that was the promotion staffs competing with each other, which was fascinating, relatively short-lived. But yeah, this music was developing. I mean, when I think about, I guess, the arc of my life in a way, more and more I'm in touch with the fact that I was among a group of people for whom this music was everything. And there was no guarantee that it was going to work or that our companies were going to embrace it. Warner's, in particular, Warner Brothers, were kind of leading the way. And it was really exciting to get to Geffen and be in business with them, because until 2.5 years later or so, they were half owners in the company. That was the share that David sold to Universal. I had these ridiculous experiences. I mean, my first day I had dinner with the Banshees minus Susie. My fifth day, they're playing Anaheim Stadium with David Bowie. Like 3 weeks later, I'm out on the Echo and the Bunnymen, New Order, Gene Loves Jezebel tour. Mind-blowing stuff that I would have been at one way or the other, but to be doing it professionally was amazing. So the culture was pretty far along, and in some ways that tour paved the way for the touring Lollapalooza. But yeah, it was a culture. Again, there was no guarantee that it was going to work, but there were a bunch of us working at labels and agencies. Geiger's a huge part of all of it, including both of those tours that I just mentioned. And he booked the Banshees too. But we weren't going to, that was what we were going to do, was elevate that music because we believed in it. And, classic rock wasn't even a phrase yet, but rock radio was still being dominated by records from the 70s. So yeah, hopefully that was somewhat the thing.
Look, you got to talk about the chain that's apocryphal. Tell me if it's true or not. But everybody says, look, you wouldn't have got Nirvana if you hadn't signed Sonic Youth. So Sonic Youth was along the way to ending up with, I think, one of the greatest acts ever, Nirvana.
Right.
Is there truth to the story?
Absolutely. And two of the greatest acts ever.
Yeah, no, look, my son, 16 years old, much bigger Sonic Youth fan, doesn't understand the appeal to Nirvana yet, but he loves Sonic Youth.
That's funny. That's why.
He says it's hard to believe I have a father who gave me every Sonic Youth record when I was like 9, but he couldn't find Goo in the house, so he pretended that we had failed to give it to him. But please go on about Sonic Youth and Nirvana, because I think people are interested to hear this.
Yeah, I think people know, and it is that. It is exactly what you described. The interesting thing about the topic is that it's not like it happened overnight. It's not like, I had this epiphanal experience at a Sonic Youth gig in 1988 at the Ritz in New York at CMJ. Then I found out that they were actually talking to labels, at which point I went to Gary and we got involved. And fortunately, we were victorious. It was extremely competitive. Not because, well, they were, they had just released Daydream Nation, which is, despite my bias towards the albums that I was involved with, probably their best album. Probably, certainly the biggest moment to date. And they weren't happy with its lack of success. So we managed to fend off everyone else and get them. And the first thing I remember Kim Gordon saying to me upon us signing them was, the next band you should sign is Nirvana. So that was like June of 1989. It was right around the time that Bleach came out. It's hard to convey the fact that that band was available for almost a year and a half after that. But again, they had just released an album on Sub Pop that, got them some notoriety for sure. It's a legendary album. To me, it was a little dense sounding. I was never a Black Sabbath fan, and it sort of felt like that was a lot of what was going on. I saw them for the first time in February 1990 at the Gavin Convention at the venue that is now called Justice League, if it's even still there, in the Visadero in San Francisco. DNA maybe. And About a Girl reached me, but I wasn't an A&R person. it wasn't really a topic. And I knew A&R people, one of whom ended up coming to work for us, Jeff Fenster, who were trying to sign them earlier than Geffen was. But once they decided that they wanted to be on a major label, it was the fall of '90, and Goo was happening. They had been on tour with Sonic Youth. We'd gotten to know them a little bit. And by that time, I believe John Silva was managing both bands. So, but in the end, there was nothing more important to them, I don't believe, than the endorsement of Sonic Youth in what we did. And, you know, I appreciate the credit, but there's a lot of people who worked at Geffen that were responsible for that culture. Ray Farrell, John Rosenfelder, Kim White later on. And we had the support of people like all the A&R people I mentioned, and Eddie Rosenblatt and David Geffen. And good time to quote my most enduring David Geffen line, which is that you have to give people a chance to fail in order for them to succeed. And that was the environment that we worked in. And I'm so lucky and grateful to have been there for one day, let alone 10 and a half years.
You know how David would say those funny things, like he'd have a line or something and it would seem to be very profound later on, and you know, he would quip them off. And I remember attending my very first executive staff meeting, and I have to say that was like a huge thing, because they had debated for a month whether they would let me come to an executive staff meeting. I mean, a guy with a screwdriver in his hand, you know, it seemed odd to them. And I got there early, right, because I wanted to eat the food and I wanted to learn a little something. And Geffen was there early, and I said, "Boss, what's job number one for me?" And he honest to God said, "Jim, your job is to destroy this company and the industry in which we sit." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Because I wake up every morning thinking there's a 14-year-old kid out there who wants my job, and I got to figure out how he's going to take it. And if you can figure that out before he does, we might survive." I mean, what an unusual thing. And by the God, we did destroy the company and the industry in which it sits. So that was funny. Anyway, this isn't about me. This is about you. And I'm fascinated with where we're at in this story. And at some point, I need to hear about Alabama 3, because I was so impressed that you found this band. And you know, like Nirvana, I didn't hear it right there at first, but I mean, my goodness, the song ends up being the theme song for The Sopranos.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked it, to be honest, because I'm so lucky and grateful for all the incredible artists I've had the pleasure of working with in whatever role. But that's a really good story. So, God, I think I got a phone call one day. I can't remember how it started, but there were two main people involved with that artist. Derek Burkett, who won One Little Indian, as it was called, it's now called One Little Independent. Very recently, the name was changed. Bjork's label. Derek was in a band called Flux of Pink Indians, early punk band, and a guy named Nick Evans, who honestly really changed my life in more ways than that one album. But that one album kind of changed my life too. So I was probably in London on other business, probably Beck stuff, I would think at that time. This would be, got to think for a minute, probably in 96, 96, 97, somewhere in there. I can't place the specific trip, but I was asked to go see this band, and I'd gotten to know Nick, and I really liked him. And he's just one of these people that is a music freak, DJ, advocate, is doing radio shows from his base in, I believe, Groningen, Netherlands, somewhere near there. And I go to see this band in Brixton. They're kind of like the house band in this pub, and a place called Perry's. And every song is about 7 minutes long, and it's the same tempo. And it's cool, and the party is really happening. But what sold me was the dinner that we had the night before. And now I realize it was definitely 96. At the Criterion, I don't know if it's still there, but it was a great Marco Pierre White restaurant in Piccadilly Circus. Crazy juxtaposition of cultures. There were more than three in Alabama 3. There were probably about 7 or 8 of them at the table. They were skinning up spliffs and just not really behaving very well, but their charisma just overwhelmed me. And especially the two main guys, the vocalists, Jake Black sadly left us, I think, about a year ago, and Larry Love, aka Rob Sprague. And with the amazing Andy Wallace, this record got made on multiple continents over multiple months. There was a guy named Josh Joseph who was scouting for us in London. Actually, that's probably how they got on my radar, was through Josh. And it's so hard to convey the experiences that you have if you're involved in the creation of an album. But that one was just epic, and the sessions were amazing. And I remember going to the Townhouse, also in London, for the session beginning, because I knew Andy a bit. He had mixed Nevermind, not mistaken, and was just, you know, I think I had worked with him on something else by then. It escapes me what. But I was a little worried about these South London gangsterish dudes juxtaposed with a more genteel, older guy from New Jersey. But whatever happened, like, they were obedient and respectful. And these sessions were endless. The mastering alone was on more than one continent over a matter of weeks. It was just this record that took a long time to be born, but it's amazing. And you're not the only person in my life that brings it up to me. It's called Exile in Cold Harbor Lane. It actually came out a few months after I left Geffen, which was unfortunate in some ways, but it was David Chase, I think a few years later at least, woke up this morning in WHTG, which is the station where Matt Pinfield was the music director and where he was plucked from by MTV to become the major celebrity and announcer, and same guy, by the way, that he is today. And that was a station that took chances on new artists, and most of what we sent them, they played, which was really appreciated. So yeah, that was probably more time than that needed, but the album is that great, and I'm glad you asked me about it.
Do you remember the 3-song Little Orange disc that you put out? Was that a promo?
Yes. And, you know, they had to be called A3 in the United States because there was a more successful
Fight with the band Alabama.
Called Alabama.
It was actually funny because of the theory that somehow you might confuse them, which certainly wasn't going to happen.
It still is, by the way. I wanted to send a link to somebody yesterday, and it didn't even come up at first because they both exist. This was in Apple Music, but I found it.
I remember asking you at the time, how do you hear these things? How do you hear this music in here? And you did tell a bit of a story about it that I very much enjoyed. And it made me realize later on that, wow, Mark saw things coming in music that really were not here yet. But they were in his ears, and he knew that this was going to happen. And in fact, I always remember your explanation a little bit about boots and pants, boots and pants, boots and pants. That was funny to me because I keep hearing that in music, and I laugh and I say, Kato taught me that. You know, I wouldn't have really thought about it if the Geico Gecko hadn't said it in that commercial one day. Anyway, look, we could probably go on for a long time, but I want to know, I mean, if these are the bright lights, what were the shadows that you enjoyed?
Tell me what you mean.
What I mean is these are the highlights with neon signs on them. Yeah, but I mean, there had to be countless other bands that were fascinating to you. And if you just mention a few of them, that would be so wonderful. I promise we'll move on to the future because I think you're very much a guy about the future. But I think it's important, and I know people are enjoying it in the chat to hear these stories that they haven't heard before, most of them.
I mean, there's so many things I could talk about. I think that one that was really special for me was Elastica, because it was a very unique situation. It was not the same trip, but it was earlier that year. No, it was probably, I'm sorry, it was not even remotely that year. I was in England with Beck, who was playing on Top of the Pops, which we had to convince him to do. This was when Loser was exploding in a pre-digital time, in a very kind of digital way. I mean, it was because of radio, and it was because of people passing, you know, cassettes and carts and DATs and things like that to each other. Because it happened before we even got the deal done. And I want to shout out Tony Berg, who was initially the first person who wanted to sign Beck to Geffen and had a lot to do with that happening. But yeah, Beck didn't even want to do Top of the Pops. I'm not really sure why. I think he was overwhelmed by how his life had changed from being someone who felt like he wasn't reaching anybody with his music, to being on KCRW and being literally chased down at his house by A&R people. So that night, there were 5 of us that were all in England for different reasons. And we all went from Top of the Pops, or maybe some people met us there, to Jericho Tavern in Oxford to see Elastica. Zutad had seen them, and Chris Morrison, who managed them, had been in touch with me because he also managed Jesus and Mary Chain at the time and was trying to get me interested, which is a band that I still love, actually. But I don't think at the time, I think at the time I didn't think it was the moment, and I was probably wrong about that. I think it was when they signed New American. But anyway, so Zutad, Jim Dunbar, Jim Barber, Jim Morlis, and myself all went to this show. And the reason why I like to talk about it is that it was the most obvious thing I think I've ever seen in the shortest amount of time. And they were being criticized. They were just kind of on the rise in the UK, but they were being criticized because their shows were so short. And yet it was so powerful in such a short amount of time. I extended my trip. I'm like, we have to get this done. Like, we have to get this done right away. This is too good. I don't want anyone else to see them. And lots of people had seen them. I met Damon Albarn for the first time that night. He was, for a long time, boyfriend of Justine Frischman, front woman of Elastica. That's a relationship that continues to this day that's extremely important to me. And we did do the deal, fortunately, ex-UK. The UK label was called Deceptive, and the partners in Deceptive were Steve Lamacq, who was editor of the Melody Maker at the time. Maybe was already doing the evening session for Radio 1, which he was the DJ on that station where Britpop developed and thrived. And he's on Six Music now. He's one of the greatest DJs who's ever lived, and I say that with no exaggeration. Mike Smith, who's a lifelong publisher and had publishing association with Elastica and Blur and Doves, who I work with, and all kinds of the greatest British artists of the last 30 years. He's at Downtown now. And Alan James, who remains a plugger. So as someone who was always an Anglophile, I went, despite working with bands like the Banshees and XTC, I never felt as plugged in to what was going on in London as that whole experience. And it's really driven me to this day. And generally when I'm over there, I get to see Damon, and it's usually the studio, and there's always something amazing going on there. And if you look at his personal output, it's absolutely ridiculous, whether it's Blur, Gorillaz, an opera, solo albums. So yeah, that's one that I like to talk about. The record was an interesting project. A lot of it was done kind of very low key and not with flashy studios. There was an engineer named Mark Waterman who they had worked with on their demos, who they really liked. But in the end, Alan Mulder got involved, and that was probably the first time I had worked with him. So I guess the illustration there is you can take any one record and the people involved may stay with you for the rest of your life. And, you know, I have this thing, generally, I think people hopefully can acknowledge I'm nice to people. And it's amazing how far it gets you. And when I think about our interactions, like we had this funny moment where my audio wasn't working before the Zoom, and Jim's like, yeah, it's so perfect because I'm here. Because I would barrage his department with complaints because I was always pushing the technology, I guess, mostly because of things that I wanted to do that it was designed to do.
No, I loved it. Look, I'll tell a good story right there, and that was you were furious that you could not get your email. And we would do everything we could do to figure it out. And then we figured out that you, of all people, were receiving full-length songs from producers over the email. So at the time, I mean, the size of these files was so enormous that you simply could not imagine that they were still being processed and churned. And so it would take like 2 hours for one of your emails to come in because it might have a full res copy of a song that was being done in the studio. And you would just be furious, and we would be doing everything we could do to help you. And yet we would think, what the hell? I mean, Mark's very digitally savvy. I mean, look, the only thing that worked with you was to give you the newest piece of equipment that came in anytime. Whatever was the best thing we had, we gave it to you, took whatever you had and gave it to someone else who was just tickled pink to have something so good. but you needed to have the best, not because you insisted on it. We simply felt that your use of things was up to that. So it was a good tension. You know, it's the kind of tension you want, which is someone pushing you to the edge of your capabilities. The idea that in, say, 1995 or 96, someone was receiving full-length songs and listening to them over their computer. I mean, my God, when we released the first full-length song in June of 94, almost no one had speakers on a computer. But you were, of course, pushing it and listening. So hats off to you. Nothing wrong with that kind of tension. It's the sort of thing that a technologist lives for, is someone who really wants to pull the very best out of what they can do. You know, so fantastic from my point of view. No negative from that. You were always very, very nice about it. And I hope we were nice in return because you are a first-class human being. And that makes me want to tell people, or have you tell people, where do you live now and how do you live?
I live in Boston.
I guess maybe that shirt. I wouldn't have been sure.
Yeah, well, you know, that's about all we have in the sports realm at the moment, but we'll take it. Yeah, I grew up here, came up in the scene here. I mean, actually, the bio, which I appreciate Tom delivering so succinctly, tells the story. I don't really need to repeat it, but as I can sort of pick up some things in between to explain it. Basically, as Grand Royal was merged with Den Music Group.
Yeah. Hold on. I don't really want to go there yet. Because that's a great part of your story, but I want people to tell you, you live in Boston, who do you live with, where do you live? You don't have to tell us the street address, but I want people to put you in context because you're very, very much a part of your scene.
Yeah, I live in Coolidge Corner in Brookline. Our family's been in this neighborhood since maybe the 30s. I grew up in Lexington.
Brookline, Massachusetts, yes?
Yes, sorry, Brookline, Massachusetts. We made a lifestyle decision to move back here in 2001. I didn't want my son to grow up here, which is ironic because less than a month ago, he moved to Los Feliz, which is where we were living when he was born. He's an actor and writer and learning coding and just getting his feet wet. And, you know, loves LA, has always wanted to get back there. It was never much of there was never much chance that he wasn't going to. And he's, you know, when you go to the Silver Lake JCC and your friends' parents know each other because of the entertainment business, you kind of develop a network at a very early age. I mean, he wasn't even 5 when we left, and yet he has friends still from that time. And that was a very cool community of itself. But yeah, I'm very, I don't live in Boston for the business advantages, though there are some really interesting ones involving the academic community that I have the opportunity to dive into. From being here, yes, I'm a huge fan of Boston sports, as anyone who knows me knows. And I must note, since you wanted to make this point, that I moved back to Boston. It was Thanksgiving Day 2001, and it was a mere, I don't know, 3 months later that the first of the 13 championship parades that have been held since my return took place. So I'm not going to take credit, but somehow those two things coincided.
That is an unlucky number, Mark. You need one more.
Yeah, well, listen, we're in a drought. I mean, it's been almost 2 years. You know, or maybe almost 3. I can't remember, but it was, it'll be 2 years in February since we've had a parade. So people are getting a little antsy. The prospects, well, we'll see. Celtics are looking good. Anyway, it's a big part of my identity. It was the whole time I was in LA, which was a total of 16 and a half years. It's a place that means a lot to me. And honestly, not to jump truly ahead to the exact present, but a place that I felt good about being in if things weren't great in the world. And I suppose that means that we have a confluence of academic, medical, and scientific industries here, all of them. Academia is so important here that it really is an industry. That's the environment that I grew up in, so it's what I know, and it's where I'm comfortable. And I'm excited. The series has been great. You know, when we started curating, and that's really what our role is. I don't want to take too much credit for those shows, but they're shows that we get involved with because we want to, and it's kind of a friends and family thing. There's probably lots of people in the chat that have participated in it one way or the other. It gives me a place to DJ, as well as I should put in my bio, I do a monthly show in Indy 617, which is sort of the third generation of the people that ran WFNX. and it's an internet station. And normally my monthly hour-long show is about artists that are performing in town. So I've had to get more creative in the last few months. But, you know, you've always emphasized that aspect of my life, which I appreciate. The time, you know, the period of time when I was doing KBLT in the Viper Room was really insane. And actually, to go back to Alabama 3 and Elastica, those two artists had me in London so much that I got into drum and bass when it was first starting, and that was the environment that we created atmosphere for. And the Viper Room was flying over British drum and bass DJs, people who maybe a month earlier could probably barely afford to eat, and they're playing at Johnny Depp's club and getting paid. And it was a really, really incredible time. And the people in that scene, many of whom I've managed to stay in touch with, and many of whom are still doing it. Just recently, I've been in touch with both DJ Rap and Mickey Finn, both incredibly amazing personalities and DJs and musicians. Anyway, I know I'm supposed to talk about Boston, but it's probably
No. Look, in sports, there are players that are utility players. They could take any position. They could do it extremely well. When you came to Griffin, I think you and I had a bit of a chuckle about how no one really knew what you did. But you did everything, in fact. It wasn't like you did nothing. It was that you did everything, that we could count you in sales, we could count you in promotion, we could count you doing publicity, we could count you doing A&R, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, we've discussed that you're a DJ. Tell me, one of those roles interests you the most, or do you just like doing all of them?
No, I don't like doing all of them. In fact, there's a lot of them I'm quite happy to not do.
Which are those?
A&R is definitely my favorite. You know, as a manager, you have to do everything, and A&R is the thing that I'm probably the least counted upon doing. But I do have these experiences as a manager that have been incredible involving A&R. I think my favorite one in recent years was an album that Rick Ocasek, the late great Rick Ocasek, produced for the Cribs, for which there was not a Rick Ocasek level budget. But thanks to Jeff Kramer, who I knew, got to know actually at Griffin because his wife Shelley worked there. I happened to go to a dinner with him and talk about it. I think we had tried to get Rick once before, but the Cribs are very much obsessed with the DGC era and have managed to work with many of the people that I've already mentioned and many that I haven't. And it's almost like they have a checklist, although actually in the case of Rick Ocasek, it was not because he was the great singer, songwriter, guitarist, producer for the Cars, but actually the producer for Weezer. I'd worked with him on a whole single that generally, whatever happened or didn't happen, I don't actually remember, but that was the only time they worked together. But to me, he was a legend. He was a legend in my life. When the Cars owned a recording studio in Newbury Street, it was like the biggest deal around here. And actually, I have an old friend who kind of operates not the exact same place, but the equivalent of it to this day. So, you know, Rick Ocasek, Peter Wolf, and Jay Giles, these were massive, massive inspirations for me. And they were the rock stars of my youth and people that you would actually see if you walked down Newbury Street, because Boston's a pretty small town. Back to your question, you know, there's so many people that drove that company, you know, at really high levels. Bill Bennett, Robin Sloan, Robert Smith. I won't name everybody. I don't want to forget anybody. Christina Callio is out there. The support that department gave me, international. Christina's done a lot since then, but
she's an amazing woman. Working with Mel.
Working
with Mel, right?
Again, like, I was given such leeway to operate at that company. It was astonishing. It you know, it'll never exist again. Like, you could create it yourself, but it wouldn't be the same. You wouldn't have this ridiculous global army of brilliant people at your disposal. And there's a thing that we have that any of us that ever worked there have with each other, which is it's I guess the closest thing to it, and I was never in one, would be a fraternity, but it's deeper than that, because there's never been a fraternity that impacted world culture the way that company did. You know, we've stayed in touch. A lot of us have stayed in touch. The reunions have been amazing. I can't believe I missed the first one. I'll never miss another one.
I feel bad. I missed. I think I was at one of them, but I think I missed the others.
Yeah, listen. We all experienced incredible things together, and it was anyway.
It was unreal. Look, it was fantastic. You know, it's funny when you mentioned Christina, because talk about people who use technology. She was kind of coy about it, and then she would say, well, you know, my two sisters work at Microsoft. You think, my goodness, she's a very tech savvy user, and her boss, Mel, oh God, you know, he just needed every ounce of technology he could get his hands on. He would play me off against Universal. Like, Jim, I think I'll just go over to Universal and use whatever they're using. And I'd have to work twice as hard, 10 times as hard to get Mel back on board. I would tell a story about that. I will tell the story about it. I'll make it very, very quick. We were in some kind of a battle, whether Universal was going to help Mel or whether we at Griffin were going to help Mel. And that morning, Universal had been over there and given him all new computers and the universal method of connecting to the internet. And as I was walking into work that day, I saw a piece of paper on the ground that said Mel, Christina, etc., the names of the people in International. And it was all of their passwords written down on a piece of paper on the street at Doheny and Sunset. And I walked upstairs and I said to Mel, are these your passwords? Are these your new technology people? And he was outraged. He just couldn't believe that they had left his password, Christina's password, everybody's password in the street. They tore everything out and let us put in what we wanted. And by the way, just to make it quick for you technologists out there, the debate was about whether we would use token ring network or Ethernet network. And I was absolutely committed to Ethernet. And all of Universal was on token ring. And I said, that's all going away. Trust me, it's going to lose. It did happen that way. It was really crazy. That's the end of a story for me. Mark, we got to talk about the future because there's less than 20 minutes left. And I know you see around these corners. And I really want to hear from you what you see as what we're going to be listening to, say next year or 5 years or 10 years from now. Where are you laying your music bets?
I mean, I could talk about the things I'm directly involved with personally that I can talk about, but beyond that, you know, what's exciting about these times is they are as you predicted, and everything is available everywhere. And, you know, the public is being allowed to speak. I do think they're programmed to still to some degree, but, you know, I mean, personally, my roster runs the gamut. You know,
Tell us.
I've always, so the artists I work with currently, I've mentioned most of them are between Tom and I think we've mentioned all except for Kunzite, which is the newest client, electronic duo. One of the guys.
Spell it. Could you spell it?
Yeah, Kunzite, like the rock.
Thank you.
Something that I'm working on with Tom Windish, and that's been great. Half of the band is Mike Stroud from Rat-a-Tat, and really exciting things going on with them. We did a single with Tom's collaborative label with Future Classic, and they're working on an album as we speak in the Catskills. But you know, obviously, it appears in general that hip hop is the dominant genre. It's a genre that I've been interested in for a long time. I haven't worked in it much. We didn't do as much hip hop at Grand Royal as people might think, but we did some, and that was great. And it, you know, I thought I was late on hip hop because I got turned on to it by The Clash, which is pretty funny because that was quite a long time ago. But you know, I think like I'd like to think that great songs are meaning more than they have in a while. That it's less about sounds and more about songs. I think that I'm personally quite captivated by bedroom pop and artists that have come out of that genre. Somebody like Clara, who happened to have grown up around here and is the daughter of someone I know. But really, you know, her music wouldn't be successful if it didn't fly. I like the democracy of streaming. It's frustrating if you are mostly involved with guitar music because the algorithms are just not your friend. And that's something I would like to see improve over time. You know, I try to work with everybody. I do appreciate the level of, I don't know how to put it, but I feel, yeah, I'm going to watch what I say here. I like working with everybody. Just put it that way.
Hold on, I like my Cato unfiltered.
Yeah, I understand. And you get it unfiltered, but this isn't just the two of us.
Well, live video streaming, I get it. It's a problem.
How about I put it this way? I like working with curators that have good taste and appreciate what's going on. And I have a kind of a special relationship with the team at Apple because it doesn't change very much. And I was going to play them music from my label in Cupertino a very long time ago, when that was not a typical place for people to go. I listen to people that I work with at Spotify are great as well, and it's just they're just sort of two very different environments, and I probably don't spend enough time on other streaming services, both as a consumer and as a marketer. The management job's hard because, you know, not that I really had a schedule working at record labels, but there was a little bit more of an order to things. I do refer to management as the Wild West. I guess I'm lucky in that everybody I work with keeps me busy. I will mention, I mean, I haven't said much about MGMT, but I will say that working with them as I have since now 2007 has been incredible because, yes, I love talking about and remembering all these amazing experiences I had with artists like Nirvana and Sonic Youth and Hole and Beck and Teenage Fan Club, and I could go on and on. But it's different when you're the manager than it is when you're at the record label. It's kind of like the buck stops here, but at the same time, when something's going amazingly well, there's a level of kind of depth and satisfaction in knowing about every little detail that went into it and being part of that. That's different than when you play a role that isn't as comprehensive. So, you know, I think that what's happening, again, I'm not going to predict music. It's the greatest song ever written may be being written right now. We don't know, or what's going to change. I mean, I don't know. What's an example? We didn't know who Cardi B was 5 years ago. And, you know, she's a multicultural, multi-platform phenomenon who seems to be smart enough to be in it for the long haul. We'll see. But, you know, just as an example of, I don't know that anybody, when she was in her last career, shall we say, I don't know that anybody was predicting what would happen to her. I think and you know, on that note, it's such an important time in terms of inclusion and diversity, and there's really exciting things going on. And to do a radio show in the middle of June when things were happening in this country that we hadn't seen at that level in a long time, to me, it was a really, like, I was able to make a musical statement starting my show, I think, with Fight the Power. I don't even really remember. I played a record that George Floyd rapped on, things like that. So, you know, the difference now is that we all can express ourselves. We all can curate anybody who's paying attention to us. I don't really pretend that I necessarily have an audience in the, you know, limited platforms that I do things with publicly, but I'm able to make my own decisions just like everybody else is. And I just think that there's a thing I learned very early on in my A&R career that I was recently reminiscing with one of the participants in, which is that if something doesn't sound right to you, you should probably say something because somebody else in the room might agree, because if you don't, no one might say anything. So we all have the instincts. It's like, you know, I appreciate our relationship and the way that you feel about me. Yes, I believe my taste is good, but it's my taste and I'm not always right. And, you know, a number of these artists that we've discussed, I mean, Alabama 3 is an interesting one because eventually that song became a hit because of the TV show. But the version of the album is significantly longer and actually expresses one of the great things about those guys, which is not when they sing, but when they talk. And the intro to that song is just incredible. Wouldn't work on a television show. But so, yeah, and that album was not successful in its original incarnation. And I mentioned Teenage Fan Club, really incredible band. Incredible melodies. They're still around. They're still great. The records I got to work on have aged unbelievably well. I'll put in a little plug for something I have really nothing to do with, but Tim Burgess from the Charlatans does these listening parties where you go on Twitter and everybody starts playing the album at the same time, and people that were involved comment on them. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of artists do them, but there was a Teenage Fan Club Twitter listening party for Grand Prix, and it just blew my mind. And I mean, I was deeply involved in this album, and it was like I hadn't heard it since it was done in some ways. I think, you know, I do love albums. I do believe in them. I don't think the marketplace really can deal with them very well anymore. And I think it's hard because artists still want to make them. And, you know, with the MGMT guys, like we just recently kind of broke that cycle and they put out a single and just did 2 songs on their own, and we actually released them completely independently. And it was a wild experience. I mean, talk about, you know, it wasn't really A&R, but it was everything else. And it was thinking about things that you never had to think about in the context of doing it yourself. When I put records out, which isn't something I do myself anymore, I worked with ADA. There was a whole process, checklist, you know, and I was really just trading on the information that I had learned at Geffen and Grand Royal. And by the way, what's the main thing I learned how to do in LA? Spend other people's money. That's why my label wasn't successful.
Look, do you remember when at Geffen we were issued buttons that had the word patience on them?
Yeah.
I mean, look, isn't that really the question of the time? Is can we still be patient with music? Wait a year or two for an album to succeed? I mean, the Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction album did not do well at first.
Took a year. Almost.
And yet, the label stuck with them.
Well, there was always something going on, and that's an interesting one because when I got there, it had been out about a week, and college and metal radio were the only formats that it had been serviced to. So I was actually involved. It's kind of funny to think about, like, Andy Kitmus calling me up because AAM was doing the college radio promotion, but he also managed the guys that mixed the album. So there were some really funny conversations along the way. But, you know, the story has been told very well. It's important that I acknowledge, as Rosie did in the chat, my bosses, Al Corey and Marco Babino, and the people who got that record played, because it did take a year. Ultimately, it took MTV, you know, the story's been told many times. Everybody here probably knows it, but they put it on an overnight just to satisfy.
Like 2:30 in the morning.
Right. And it reacted. And videos were put on at that time of night so that they didn't react in a way, or so that they could be on a play. It's just the way radio continues to work, with overnight spins that don't really accomplish anything. But yeah, you could play that video at any hour or moment of the day, talk about Welcome to the Jungle, and it would react. Yeah, and it was an amazing thing to be around, because once you've been lucky enough to see an album blow up that way, you know what to look for. You know that one little sign means a lot of things. So in some ways, I'm able to be patient, but in a lot of ways, I think of a quote from Mike Greek, an agent I'm really lucky to work with on MGMT at CAA in London, who says that, like, in the current environment, the album should be the end. And I think that that's kind of truer than not. And in a way, it's more like the mentality is to put out singles and do activities, since at least in lieu of live shows, to generate interest and try to build up an audience that's going to react to something more meaty. But I love it. I love the format. I've got lots of CDs on the wall, and I've gotten rid of most of them. I still have lots of them. But if the audience doesn't care, it doesn't really matter what we think. And that's the most kind of future-oriented thing I guess I can say. And artists are still hanging on to it. I don't blame them. It's what they were raised on. It's what they believe in. And as an A&R person, and even as a manager, I'm obsessed with album sequence still, even though, I learned the craft when you had the four corners of a piece of vinyl, and you wanted the first side to end with something strong, the second side had to begin with something strong, and the last song had to be memorable, like all that stuff. Well, with CDs or digital, it's kind of the same. You got to reel people in quickly and then take them on a ride, and it's really hard to do. And not every album is good enough to warrant the kind of sequence of, and I take zero credit for this because I had nothing to do with it, but Nevermind is a perfect sequence, in my opinion, because just when you think you've heard everything that band can do, On a Plane comes on, which is one of my favorite songs of theirs. So, there's axioms and models and things that I have learned that are relevant, but much of what we know from the old days it's almost like a hindrance to marketing music now.
Can your notion of patience be accommodated by today's world? And I mention that in the context of live video streaming, which seems to move at a lightning pace.
Meaning how it's developing as a popular technology?
Well, as a technology and also as a medium for expression. In other words, we're beginning to hear music this way. We're seeing artists this way. I mean, you mentioned Cardi B, and she's already moved on to OnlyFans and got $2 million in a week from OnlyFans, which ordinarily would be treated like a copy of Hustler on sale at a grocery store or a gas station.
I did reference multiple platforms. When I think about that button and Eddie Rosenblatt and his, pleading with us to be patient, we don't have most of the drivers that allowed that to be possible. The one driver that we do have is the actual music. So the idea, again, I think she did it with her album. You know, it was the end. She was firmly established at that point. Billie Eilish, incredible example, where you knew that the day that album came out, virtually everyone in the world was listening to it because of what she had built up. Now, it doesn't always work. You could put song and song and after song out, but in theory, if you're doing other things to build the audience, it can work that way. What I don't know is if you can be patient for a year after the album's out. It's going to take some kind of creative event that registers. I'm watching the live streaming space very closely. I don't believe that it will go away when performances come back.
I'm with you there.
Live in-person performances come back. Not only that, by that time, live streaming, I think, is going to look a lot different than it does right now. And that's exciting to me. And, and yet, like, if I see the Jazz Butcher, who I worked with at Big Time, playing solo in his house on a Sunday afternoon, I'll actually watch for a while because it's personal. Like, it's someone I know personally, and I love the songs and I love what he says in between them. So, I mean, there's so many ways to reach so many people. I suppose there are ways that you can be patient and the album can happen a year later in some way. But I have this thing where, like, once it's out there, it's out there. And I mean, let me give you a really great example and put in a little plug, because Doves have their 5th album, really incredible, called The Universal Want. It comes out next Friday, the 11th. And this is an artist that hasn't existed since streaming became ubiquitous. So you can imagine the challenge of creating numbers for them on the streaming services and reaching people that are now more in their 40s and 50s. Not all of them, but Doves were a band that if you were in college in 2000 or 2001, reached you in a way that you'll never forget. Well, finding those people is not that easy. And I've had some interesting conversations, including with people that are in the chat, about how they're reached and really, like, learn some interesting things. I suppose the good news is that when you talk about an audience like that, there are drivers from the old days that still matter, like the non-coms that really matter, like KCRW and the Current in Minneapolis and KEXP, and people that are tuned in enough to be here know what I'm talking about. And I hope that we can get everything possible from those platforms without the band being here. Though sooner or later the band will be here.
Tom, any questions? I don't see the chat, so I don't get the questions. You've got the questions. I've been piggish. I've kept Mark all the way up till 3 minutes before the end. I know Glenn Booth asked, Mark, how do you feel about just dropping records by surprise? And Tom, follow up with questions.
I think if you're big enough, I love Glenn. We go way back to me working him at WXYC, if I'm not mistaken, at UNC. I think if you have a big enough audience, you can do it. But even releasing an MGMT single with no warning wasn't as big as it could have been. And they immediately realized the difference doing it on their own, from having, a global multinational music company who had released 4 albums by them involved. And yet there were things that we accomplished that went the same way, including in terms of visibility, which was really satisfying and exciting.
Twitch just called us frat brothers. Kevin Twitchell.
We are, and he is one too.
That's a good one. Okay, other questions. There's only 2 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we get any of them in.
There's 2 questions out here that merit Mark's attention. One is technology focused, and that is, given that you're, and I'm interpreting Brian Zisk's question here, but given that you're an A&R guy through and through who loves an album, how do you relate to today's TikTok and Twitch culture that is so singles, and not even singles driven, but more 15-second clip driven?
I'm definitely not in the demo. I'm trying to incorporate as much of that stuff from a marketing standpoint into my world as possible, and keeping a close eye on it. I think for me, it's listening to playlists and listening to songs individually, and it's infuriating that the streaming services don't make it that easy for you to even find albums. So yeah, I'm a little bit of a slave to the Spotify algorithm playlists that theoretically are based on what I listen to. What they don't realize is a lot of my Spotify listening is about our live series and trying to decide whether I want to get involved with shows or not. And quite often it's not. But yeah, I guess the short answer is I'm still able to do it song by song. For me, 15 seconds is not usually enough. And no, I don't really live in that world. And maybe I'm sure I'm missing lots, but we all are missing lots. There's too much not to. 40,000 songs a day being uploaded, something like that. I mean, it's unfathomable.
Well, given
Yeah,
that
he did ask about live video streaming. So I'm just going to throw out here for a second that until live video streaming figures out how to pay artists, we've got to give them a short shrift because they've got to pay. We can't let what happened with radio and podcasting go on with this. But go ahead, Tom. There must be another question.
So, Mark, how do all these artists out there that want to be broken by a legend like you, how do they reach you? Where are you available online?
They can. I'm going to quote former U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power, who I'm a big fan of. And this is obnoxious, but it's not that hard to find me, is all I'm going to say. If that's all right. I realize it's not great LinkedIn type business culture, but nobody here is going to have any trouble finding me. I will say that, my job is not necessarily finding the next anything. My management roster involves people that have had something going on beforehand. That's the best way to get on my radar, really. There are a lot of people in the chat and probably beyond that whose word means a lot still. That's one of my favorite things that still matters and again, a lot of the algorithmic curation actually works that way. So, trusted sources mean a lot to me. You know who you are, and I appreciate all of you for it. Yeah, I hope that's not too obnoxious.
No,
Look, I'd go on another 2 hours if we could, but I know we can't.
I found Samantha Power, by the way. That's you responded to my email, but but anyway.
Well, gentlemen, well, let me wrap up by first saying thank you to you both. You're complete gentlemen, and we appreciate the wisdom that you've shared with the audience today. I know you've created some new fans, and you've reinforced some of your, existing fans in this video today. I want to make everyone aware that on next Tuesday, we've got another chapter in this book that we're writing called The Smartest People in the Room, featuring two more geniuses, Steve Keller and Craig Havinghurst. So please tune in at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. And then lastly, folks, just be nice to each other and wear a mask and vote on November 3rd. With that, folks, I am signing off.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, great series, Tom.